I never imagined that walking into my parents' house would feel like stepping into a courtroom, but that's exactly what happened last Saturday. I'm Anna Carter, 32 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've poured every ounce of my passion and energy into a biotech startup called MedMatch, a company I believe can change how patients. But to my family, I was nothing more than a reckless dreamer, chasing a losing gamble. As I stepped through the front door of the stately New England home I grew up in, I saw the familiar faces of my parents, my older brother James, and several relatives sitting stiffly. Before I could even say hello, my father, a renowned cardiac surgeon with a sharp voice and even sharper expectations, cut right to the chase. "Anna," he said coldly, "this isn't working. It's time you face reality." My mother looked torn, glancing at me with a sadness that pierced my chest. My brother, the rising star lawyer, sat quietly, his usual smirk replaced by. They had called this meeting because to them, I was failing to live up to the family legacy, failing to secure a stable career, failing to follow the safe, expected path. I could feel the weight of their words pressing down on me like a storm about to break. But what they didn't know, what I was about to show them, was that the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. Because sometimes the moments when those closest to you doubt you the most are the very moments before everything changes. Stay with me, because what happened next turned my whole world upside down. And maybe it will change yours too. Growing up in the Carter household meant living in the shadow of achievement. My father, Dr. Michael Carter, was not just any cardiac surgeon. He was one of the most respected specialists in Boston, known for his precision in the operating room and his unwavering dedication to saving lives. I remember family gatherings where relatives would quietly lean in just to hear about his latest breakthrough or the complex surgeries he had performed. My mother, Dr. Evelyn Carter, was an economics professor at one of the Ivy League universities nearby, and her intellect was equally formidable. She was the kind of person who could discuss global financial crises over dinner as casually as someone else might talk about the weather. Dinner at the Carter house was never just about food. It was a ritual centered on success and tradition. The conversations would inevitably circle around the accomplishments of family members: Ivy League degrees, coveted job offers, promotions, and stable, respectable careers. I grew up hearing phrases like, "We expect nothing less than excellence," or "You have to have a solid plan, something that guarantees stability." These weren't just casual expectations, they were the pillars that shaped every decision we made as a family. My older brother James was the embodiment of those expectations. From an early age, he was the golden child, disciplined, focused, and relentless in his pursuit of a legal career. I remember how the adults would beam with pride when they spoke about his acceptance into Harvard Law and his fast track toward partnership at one of Boston's most prestigious firms. James was a safe bet, the definition of success in our family's eyes. And then there was me, Anna, the creative risk taker. I was always the one who saw the world differently, who challenged the status quo. While James meticulously followed the expected path, I was the kid who dreamed up unconventional ideas, who wanted to invent and innovate rather than fit neatly into a traditional mold. That difference was never lost on my parents, and honestly, it created a quiet tension between us. My father would often say, with a forced smile, "Anna, sometimes you have to play it safe. Not every idea can be a winner." My mother, though kinder, would gently remind me of the importance of having a backup plan, the kind of plan that would protect me from failure. Family dinners were the hardest. They were minefields of unspoken comparisons and subtle judgments. I'd sit at the table sharing stories about my research projects or my ideas for MedMatch, hoping to convey the importance of what I was building. But more often than not, those conversations would drift back to James, his recent courtroom victories, the firm's latest high-profile case, his steady climb up the corporate ladder. The implicit message was clear. This was the path to respect, to security, to approval. It wasn't that my family didn't love me, they did. But love in our household was often expressed through expectations and accomplishments rather than affection or encouragement. I wanted to make them proud, but I was also desperate to prove that my way, the risky, uncertain road of a startup founder, was valid and meaningful. Despite the friction, I excelled academically, graduating with honors from MIT with degrees in biomedical engineering and computer science. But even that wasn't enough to completely bridge the gap. Because success in the Carter family wasn't just about grades or degrees, it was about choosing the right path, the one that guaranteed stability, predictability, and status. Looking back, I realize how much that legacy shaped me. It fueled both my determination and my doubts. I wanted to break free from the mold, but feared losing the support of the people who mattered most. I wrestled constantly with the need to innovate and the pressure to conform. As I stood in my parents' living room that day, facing their intervention, I felt the weight of that legacy pressing down harder than ever. But I also knew, deep in my heart, that my journey, however unconventional, was worth fighting for. Because the future I was building wasn't just about success as they defined it, it was about changing lives, starting with those of patients who had nowhere else to turn. Graduating from MIT was one of the proudest moments of my life. Walking across that stage, hooded in my cap and gown, I felt a rush of accomplishment. I had earned dual degrees, biomedical engineering and computer science, two fields that perfectly blended my passion for technology and healthcare. I had spent countless late nights in labs, libraries, and coding marathons. The long hours, the sacrifices, the relentless pursuit of knowledge all culminated in that moment. For my family, it was a validation of their expectations. For me, it was just the beginning. After graduation, I landed a coveted position at a leading healthcare technology company in Boston. It was everything I had been told was the right move: a stable job with great benefits, a prestigious name on my resume, and a clear path to career growth. My parents were relieved and proud. My father, especially, saw it as a sign that I was finally following the conventional path, something safe and respectable. For a while, I tried to convince myself that I was content. But as I settled into the daily grind, something inside me began to shift. I witnessed the struggles of patients with rare diseases, individuals battling conditions so uncommon that finding the right specialists or clinical trials was often a lonely and frustrating journey. I sat in meetings, reviewing data and algorithms designed to improve healthcare delivery, but I saw the gaps. The system was fragmented, bureaucratic, and painfully slow. Patients were falling through the cracks. One particular moment stands out vividly. I met a mother whose child had a rare genetic disorder. She told me how she had spent years driving from hospital to hospital, making endless phone calls, trying to find a specialist who understood her daughter's condition. Every lead turned cold, every hope dashed. It was heartbreaking. And it made me realize that the technology we were building wasn't reaching the people who needed it most. That day, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I couldn't ignore the call to do something different, to build a solution that would cut through the red tape, a platform powered by artificial intelligence that could match rare disease patients to the right specialists and clinical trials quickly and accurately. It was a bold vision, and it meant stepping off the secure career ladder I had worked so hard to climb. I remember the difficult conversation with my parents when I told them I was leaving my stable job to start my own company. My mother was cautiously supportive, reminding me to have a backup plan. My father, ever pragmatic, was skeptical. He warned me about the complexities of healthcare and the high failure rate of startups. My brother barely looked up from his phone. But despite their doubts, I knew I had to follow this path. Together with my college friend and brilliant programmer Maya, I launched MedMatch. We started in a cramped Cambridge apartment where the walls seemed to close in, but our dreams felt limitless. Late nights turned into early mornings as we coded algorithms, spoke to doctors, and sought feedback from patients. Every small breakthrough was a victory, a sign that we were onto something that could really make a difference. Starting MedMatch was both exhilarating and terrifying. The freedom to build something meaningful was intoxicating, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. Funding was scarce, regulatory hurdles loomed large, and the tech had to be precise. Lives depended on it. Meanwhile, the pressure from my family to abandon this risky venture grew louder. But I held on to the stories. The mother desperate for help, the patient finally matched to a clinical trial, because those were the reasons I refused to give up. Looking back, that period shaped everything that came after. It was a leap of faith fueled by passion and a deep sense of purpose. I wasn't just building a startup, I was building hope for thousands of people who had been overlooked by the system. And even though the path ahead was uncertain, I knew this was the kind of success worth fighting for. When I told my family that I was quitting my stable job to start MedMatch, the reactions were complicated, to say the least. It wasn't the overwhelming cheerleading I had hoped for. Instead, I was met with a mix of cautious support, skepticism, and in some cases, outright indifference. My mother, Evelyn, was probably the most supportive, but her support came wrapped in worry. She gave me a tight hug and said, "Anna, if anyone can make this work, it's you. But promise me you'll have a backup plan, please." Her voice was gentle but trembling underneath, like she was trying to stay hopeful while bracing herself for the possibility that I might fail. That backup plan was her way of saying, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket." And while I appreciated her care, it was also a reminder that she wasn't fully convinced. My father, Michael, was a different story. He was more reserved, sitting back with that calm but serious look surgeons have when weighing risks. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Healthcare is a tough industry, Anna. It's not just about good ideas. You'll have to navigate regulations, manage money, and convince people to believe in your vision. Many startups don't make it." And yet, despite his doubts, he handed me a check for seed funding. But it wasn't a gift, it was a loan, with formal terms and conditions attached. It was his way of saying, "I'm willing to support you if you're serious." His faith was pragmatic, but I knew it came with expectations. Then there was James, my older brother. He was the hardest to read. He barely looked up from his phone, shrugged, and muttered, "Starting a company, huh? Hope it works out." There was a slight edge to his tone, maybe even a hint of mockery. James was already climbing the ladder at his law firm, steady, predictable, the safe family success story. To him, my startup dream seemed reckless, maybe even childish. It stung, but I tried not to let it show. Despite the mixed signals, Maya, my co-founder and closest ally, and I threw ourselves into the work. Our office was a tiny, cramped apartment in Cambridge, the kind of place where the furniture was hand-me-downs, the walls were thin, and the only view was a brick wall a few feet away. But within those four walls, we poured our hearts into the code. Nights blended into mornings as we debugged algorithms, tested new ideas, and Skyped with doctors and patients for feedback. The room was cluttered with empty coffee cups, scattered notebooks, and a whiteboard scribbled with formulas and flowcharts. Sleep was a luxury. Passion and purpose kept us going. But the startup grind wasn't just exhausting physically. It started to strain everything, especially my personal life. Jake, my boyfriend of 3 years, had initially been my biggest cheerleader. A finance guy with a pragmatic streak, he liked the idea of dating someone who chased big dreams. He'd tell friends, "She's building something incredible." But as months dragged on with little external validation and no clear profits, his enthusiasm waned. Phone calls became less frequent, our weekend dates were often postponed, and when we did talk, the conversations grew more tense. One night, after another 14-hour workday, I heard the hesitation in his voice. "Anna, I'm worried you're throwing away a solid career for something too uncertain. Maybe it's time to think about what's real, a stable job, benefits, a future we can count on." His words felt like a punch to the gut, but I understood. The startup world was a roller coaster, and not everyone wanted to ride along. Balancing the demands of building MedMatch with the pressure from my family and the unraveling of personal relationships was overwhelming. Every hour spent pitching investors or debugging code was an hour away from the people I loved, or trying to hold on to the relationships that mattered. Yet, even as doubts crept in from all directions, Maya and I held tight to our vision. We knew the stakes weren't just about financial success. This was about patients, rare disease sufferers who had no other hope. Those early days tested every part of me, my resilience, my focus, and my belief that what we were doing mattered. Little did I know, the real test was still ahead, when the pressures from family and the challenges of the startup world would collide in ways that would force me to fight not just for my company, but for my dreams and my identity. The early days of MedMatch was a roller coaster of emotions, moments of hope mixed with waves of frustration. We celebrated small victories whenever a pilot hospital agreed to test our platform. These were the moments that kept Maya and me going. When a doctor told us our AI algorithm was making a real difference by connecting a rare disease patient to a specialist, or when we received heartfelt messages from families thanking us for offering a glimmer of hope in what felt like an impossible situation. But those bright spots were shadowed by the harsh realities of startup life. Funding rounds that we had counted on fell through at the last minute. Investors, especially those unfamiliar with healthcare, struggled to grasp the complexity and long timelines involved in navigating the medical regulatory landscape. Each rejection chipped away at our confidence, and the financial runway was shrinking faster than we'd anticipated. Meanwhile, the regulatory red tape surrounding healthcare technology was more daunting than I had ever imagined. Each step forward required compliance checks, clinical validations, and negotiations with hospital administrators who were understandably cautious about integrating new technology into patient care. It was a slow, exhausting process, sometimes painfully slow. And as the external pressures mounted, the pressure from my family intensified too. Family dinners, once a place for lighthearted conversations and shared meals, had transformed into uncomfortable interrogations. I dreaded those Sunday evenings at my parents' house more than anything. Questions were sharp and relentless. "How's the burn rate looking?" my father would ask, his voice calm but with an edge that cut deeper than he probably intended. "When do you expect to see real revenue?" Aunt Patricia, ever practical, would chime in with her concerns about sustainability. "Is this just a hobby or a real business?" And the comparisons to James were almost inevitable. "James just closed a $3 million case last week," my mother would say, as if to remind me where real success was happening in the family. The implicit message was clear. My work wasn't adding up in the eyes of those I cared about most. I tried to explain the longer timelines and the unique challenges of healthcare innovation, but the language of startups and clinical trials felt foreign to them. They didn't see the hours of research, the meetings with specialists, or the painstaking work behind our matching algorithm. They saw only what they could measure easily: profits, titles, and status. Their doubts gnawed at me. I found myself questioning whether I was fooling myself, whether the sacrifices were worth it. Doubt crept in quietly at first, then grew louder, especially during the lonely nights when the code didn't work or the investors said no again. But it was the stories from patients that kept my flame alive. I thought about the mother who told me her daughter finally found a specialist through MedMatch after years of dead ends. I thought about the teenager who got matched to a clinical trial that gave her a chance at a normal life. Those moments reminded me why I started this journey. Not for the praise, the money, or the approval, but because this work could save lives. So I held on to that vision with everything I had. But the growing chasm between my family's expectations and my reality was impossible to ignore. Their increasing skepticism wasn't just a backdrop, it was a storm closing in on all sides. And the tension was building, ready to reach a breaking point. I should have seen it coming. The escalating questions at family dinners, the thinly veiled doubts, the quiet sighs of disappointment, it all built toward that day. The day my family decided they needed to intervene. They called it a family meeting, but I knew it was more than that. It was an intervention, an attempt to pull me back onto what they saw as the safe path before it was too late. The meeting was set at the Carter estate, the sprawling New England home where I had grown up. Walking up the familiar steps felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were waiting to weigh me down. When I entered, the room was already filled. My parents sat at the head of the table, their faces composed but tense. James was there, looking impeccably polished, as if ready to deliver a closing argument. Around the table sat relatives and even my parents' financial advisor, a man I'd only met a few times before, but who now seemed poised to dissect every detail of my venture. The air was thick with unspoken concern and expectation. My mother started gently. "Anna, we love you, and that's why we're here. We want to make sure you're making the best decisions for your future." Then my father's voice took on a sharper tone. "This startup, this MedMatch, it's risky. You've invested so much time, money, energy into something that hasn't yet proven itself. The regulatory hurdles, the burn rate, the likelihood of success is slim. We're worried you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position." Before I could respond, the financial advisor jumped in with spreadsheets and charts. He pointed to the burn rate, the rate at which I was spending money without generating revenue. "This kind of cash flow isn't sustainable. You're burning through your savings and the loan your father gave you. At some point, you have to consider a stable income, benefits, retirement." Relatives nodded in agreement, some voicing their own concerns. "Have you thought about taking a corporate job? A position where you can use your skills without all this risk? You have an impressive resume. Why not put it to use somewhere safe?" The words hit me like a wave. Safe, stable, responsible, all things I was supposed to want, all things I'd been told to pursue my whole life. But those words felt like chains, holding me back from something I believed in with my whole heart. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I understand your concerns. I know this path isn't easy. But what we're building at MedMatch is about more than profit or stability. It's about creating a platform that can change how patients with rare diseases access treatment. These are people who have been forgotten by the system. We're giving them hope and real opportunities." My voice was firmer now, fueled by the passion that had driven me from the start. Yes, the challenges are huge, the funding is tight, and the regulatory environment is complex. But every day, we hear from patients and families who've benefited from our platform. Those stories are why we keep going. Despite my defense, I felt isolated. The room felt colder, the eyes less understanding. I was defending not just a business, but a dream, a vision my family seemed unwilling to see or accept. James spoke up, his tone measured but cutting. "I respect your passion, Anna, but passion doesn't pay bills. In law, we have concrete wins and measurable progress. What you're doing feels like chasing shadows." I wanted to tell him that those shadows were lives, real people whose futures depended on breakthroughs like MedMatch. But the words caught in my throat. The meeting stretched on, the voices around the table rising and falling like waves, all pushing me toward a future that felt foreign to me. The intervention wasn't just about the business. It was about who I was, what I stood for, and whether my family could accept that I was carving out a different path. When it finally ended, I left the Carter estate feeling hollow and misunderstood. But beneath that hurt, a fierce resolve was growing. This was my fight, and I wasn't ready to give up. Little did I know that within days, everything was about to change, in a way no one, not even my family, could have predicted. The family intervention was dragging on, each word feeling heavier than the last. I was doing my best to hold my ground, defending MedMatch and the vision behind it, but it felt like speaking to a wall. The room was filled with doubt, skepticism, and what I could only describe as quiet disappointment. Then, in the middle of one particularly tense exchange, my mother's phone buzzed loudly against the polished mahogany table. The sound seemed to slice through the room's heavy atmosphere like a lightning bolt. She glanced down at her screen, her fingers trembling just slightly as she read the notification. Wait, everyone listen to this," she said, voice barely above a whisper but urgent enough to pull all eyes to her. It was a breaking news alert from the New York Times. The headline blazed across the screen. MedMatch valued at nearly $1 billion amid acquisition talks with pharma giant. The room went completely silent. My father's stern expression melted into one of disbelief. My brother's smirk vanished, replaced by wide eyes. Even Aunt Patricia looked taken aback, clutching her napkin as if to steady herself. I stared at my mother's phone, barely able to process the words. $1 billion valuation? Acquisition talks? These were developments far beyond what anyone in that room had anticipated. Even I hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of what was unfolding. The New York Times article detailed how MedMatch's AI platform had caught the attention of one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. Impressed by its unprecedented accuracy in matching rare disease patients with clinical trials. It mentioned confidential negotiations that could transform MedMatch from a struggling startup into a global healthcare powerhouse overnight. The energy in the room shifted dramatically. The judgment and doubt were replaced by astonishment, whispers, and incredulous glances. Suddenly, the narrative was no longer about a risky gamble. It was about a potential breakthrough that no one had seen coming. I felt my heart pounding as I reached for my phone. I needed to connect with Maya and our lawyer immediately. This wasn't just news to manage. It was a turning point that could change everything: the trajectory of our company, my family's perception of my work, and the future I had fought so hard to build. Calling Maya, I could hear the excitement and disbelief in her voice. "Anna, this is huge. We knew we were close, but this is beyond anything we imagined." I also dialed our lawyer, who was already scrambling to organize meetings with the pharmaceutical company's legal team and our investors. The sudden spotlight meant everything had to move fast: negotiations, legal reviews, strategic planning. Even as the chaos unfolded, I glanced back at my family. Their faces told a story of conflicted emotions: pride, surprise, and perhaps a hint of regret for doubting me. In that moment, I realized something profound. The path I had chosen was never going to be easy, and the approval I craved might never come easily. But breakthroughs, the kind that change lives and histories, often arrive at the most unexpected moments. And just like that, everything was about to change. Once the news broke about MedMatch's billion-dollar valuation and acquisition talks, everything moved at lightning speed. Meetings, calls, and negotiations filled every waking moment. The pharmaceutical giant was serious. They saw the potential in our technology, and the pressure was on to finalize terms that would shape the future of the company. What surprised me most during this whirlwind was James. My older brother, who had been distant and dismissive for so long, suddenly stepped into a new role, that of a legal advisor on our behalf. I hadn't expected it, especially given our past tensions. But seeing the stakes, he offered his expertise, helping Maya and me navigate the complex legal landscape that came with such a high-profile deal. One evening, James showed up at our modest office apartment, holding a stack of documents and a sharp, analytical gaze that felt both familiar and new. "I've been reviewing the terms," he said. "There's a way to structure this deal as a partnership rather than an outright acquisition. It means you keep control over the core technology while still getting significant capital up front." His proposal was a game changer. Maintaining control over MedMatch's technology was crucial to Maya and me. We wanted to ensure that the platform stayed true to its mission of helping patients, not just maximizing profit for shareholders. James's legal acumen gave us a path forward that balanced financial security with strategic independence. Seeing him in that role softened a lot of the past hurt. It was a reminder that beneath our differences, we shared the same drive for success, just expressed in very different ways. Around the same time, my father reached out to me in a way he hadn't before. The man who had once warned me about the risks of disrupting healthcare now wanted to talk. I remember the afternoon clearly. He came to our office, quieter and more reflective than usual. "Anna," he said, sitting down across from me, "I owe you an apology." His voice was steady but sincere. "I was wrong to doubt your vision. I only saw the risks because I was protecting you in the way I knew how. But what you're building, it's remarkable." Hearing those words from my father, the man whose approval I had long sought, was deeply healing. He admitted that the startup world was foreign territory for him, but he had been reading about MedMatch's progress and the impact it was already making. Our conversations grew more frequent and less guarded. He asked thoughtful questions about the technology, the challenges, and the patients whose lives were being touched. It felt like a bridge was forming where before there had only been distance. With my family's support evolving, our dynamic shifted. The tension at dinners eased, replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. My mother, once cautious, now proudly shared news about MedMatch with her colleagues. James, while still fiercely competitive, was more willing to listen and offer advice without judgment. This new balance wasn't perfect. There were still moments of disagreement, but it was rooted in understanding rather than doubt. The partnership deal we negotiated with the pharmaceutical giant reflected that spirit. It provided the capital MedMatch needed to expand while safeguarding the mission Maya and I had fought for. More importantly, it symbolized a turning point in my family relationships. We had moved from confrontation to collaboration. Looking back, I realized that the breakthrough wasn't just about business success. It was about breaking down walls within my family, walls built from expectations, fears, and misunderstandings. That chapter closed with a sense of hope and renewal, but I knew the journey was far from over. The real work, growing MedMatch, navigating a new landscape, and continuing to fight for patients, was just beginning. And with my family now walking beside me, for the first time, I felt truly ready. After finalizing the partnership deal with the pharmaceutical giant, everything changed for MedMatch and for me. The resources and support that came with that agreement allowed us to scale our platform rapidly. What had started in a cramped Cambridge apartment was now blossoming into a healthcare technology powerhouse with a growing team and expanding reach. Within months, MedMatch was connecting thousands of rare disease patients across the US and Europe with specialists and clinical trials that could literally change their lives. I remember the day we surpassed our first 5,000 successful matches. It felt surreal. Emails, letters, and video messages poured in from families who had been searching for answers for years, finally finding hope through our platform. That kind of impact fueled our team's passion every single day. Maya and I watched as our vision unfolded beyond anything we had dared to imagine in those early, exhausting months. It wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about real people, kids, parents, adults fighting against odds, getting a chance where none had existed before. On a personal level, the changes were just as profound. After years of living in temporary rentals and shared spaces, I finally bought a home, a modest but comfortable place in a neighborhood I loved. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of the stability and progress I had fought so hard to achieve. Maya, too, was able to secure her family's financial future. She paid off her parents' mortgage and set up college funds for her nieces and nephews. We both still worked intense hours, but now from a place of choice rather than desperation. Our sacrifices were paying off in ways that touched not only our lives, but those of the people we cared about most. Family dinners, once tense and fraught with judgment, had transformed. Conversations shifted from cautious inquiries to technical discussions about algorithm improvements, regulatory challenges, and plans for international expansion. My parents, who had once questioned my choices, now proudly shared updates about MedMatch with their colleagues and friends. James, who had been the most critical early on, surprised me by becoming an advocate within his network, connecting us with legal contacts and potential partners. Our relationship evolved from one of rivalry to mutual respect, a change I hadn't dared hope for. Even my personal relationships began to heal. Jake, my longtime boyfriend who had distanced himself during the startup's toughest days, reached out. His message was tentative, asking if we could talk. Meeting him again was complicated. The wounds of doubt and distance hadn't fully healed, but we talked openly, acknowledging the struggles and growth we'd both experienced. He admitted that watching me persevere had made him rethink what stability really meant. I told him that the path I'd chosen wasn't easy, but it was mine, driven by purpose, passion, and a commitment to something bigger than myself. Whether we could rebuild what was lost was uncertain, but at least we had found a place of honest conversation. Looking back, this period felt like a victory, not just in business, but in life. The impact MedMatch was making validated every sleepless night, every rejection, every moment I had doubted myself. The personal milestones, buying a home, reconnecting with family, healing relationships, were reminders that success wasn't just measured in numbers or headlines. It was about the fullness of life, the connections we build, and the difference we make. Yet, even as I savored these achievements, I knew the journey was far from over. The healthcare landscape was constantly evolving, and the stakes were only growing higher. New challenges awaited: regulatory hurdles, global expansion, competition, all demanding our attention and resilience. But with my family now genuinely behind me, with Maya and our dedicated team by my side, and with the patients whose stories kept me grounded, I felt ready to face whatever came next with the same determination that had brought me this far. Because this wasn't just a startup anymore. It was a movement, a mission, and it was only just beginning. As I sit here today, reflecting on this incredible journey, I'm filled with a mix of emotions: pride, relief, gratitude, and above all, a deep understanding of what it truly means to persevere. When I first embarked on this path with MedMatch, I was filled with hope and determination, but also fear. Fear of failure, fear of disappointing my family, fear of stepping into the unknown. And yet, here I am, years later, with a company that's changing lives and a family that has come to understand and support the vision I refuse to abandon. The road was anything but easy. I faced rejection, not just from investors and regulators, but from the people closest to me. Family dinners filled with doubt and comparisons, the gnawing question of whether I was chasing a foolish dream or something worthwhile. There were countless moments when giving up felt like the simpler option, but each time I reminded myself why I started. Success, I learned, isn't just about money or recognition. It's about resilience, the ability to keep moving forward when the world seems to say no. It's about vision, believing in something bigger than yourself even when no one else does. And it's about defining success on your own terms, not the terms laid out by others. I want you to know that if you're out there chasing a dream that others don't understand, or feeling the weight of doubt from family, friends, or even yourself, you're not alone. The path of innovation and change is rarely straightforward or easy. It's filled with setbacks, criticism, and moments of loneliness. But those moments don't define you. What defines you is the courage to keep going. MedMatch was more than a business venture to me. It was a mission to bring hope to those who had none, to challenge a broken system, to prove that technology could be a force for real human connection and healing. And in holding on to that mission, despite the pressure and the obstacles, I found my true success. So, if there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: never let anyone else's definition of success limit your vision. You have the right to pursue your passions, to innovate, to disrupt, and to build something meaningful, even if it scares others or seems unconventional. I encourage you to hold tight to your dreams, especially when they feel most fragile. Surround yourself with people who believe in you, seek out mentors, and don't be afraid to ask for help. And most importantly, remember that every step forward, no matter how small, is progress. If my journey has inspired you, I'd love to hear your stories. What dreams are you pursuing? What challenges have you faced, and how have you overcome them? Sharing our experiences not only lifts us up, but also creates a community of support and inspiration. So please, comment below and share your stories of perseverance and innovation. Let's remind each other that even when the path is tough, the breakthrough is often just around the corner. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, your vision matters, your voice matters, and your persistence can change the world. Keep believing, keep pushing, and never give up.